I watched them pull into my grandfather's driveway like they owned the place. 3 cars, a black SUV in the lead, 2 silver sedans behind it. The man who stepped out first was wearing a polo shirt and khakis, carrying a clipboard, and he had the kind of face that people practice in a mirror when they want to look official without actually being law enforcement. He wasn't. I knew that immediately. My aunt had hired him through some property management company she'd found online. I was standing at the kitchen window of the farmhouse, holding a mug of coffee I'd made 40 minutes ago and forgotten to drink. It had gone cold. My hands were steady, which surprised me, because my heart was doing something complicated in my chest. Not quite fear, not quite rage. Something between the two that I didn't have a name for yet. My grandfather's name was Howard Albright. Everyone called him Howie. He'd built this property from nothing, 340 acres of farmland in central Ohio, a working operation with a processing barn and a grain storage facility, and a farmhouse that was older than anyone alive could remember, but had been renovated 3 times and was, by any honest measure, beautiful. He'd started with a seasonal vegetable operation in his 20s, expanded into soybeans and corn, and by the time he was 60, he'd quietly turned the whole thing into a regional grain supplier with contracts across 4 states. He never talked about what it was worth. That wasn't his way. He died in February on a Tuesday morning from a second heart attack that came 12 days after the first one. I had been sleeping in the chair beside his hospital bed when it happened. I didn't wake up in time to say goodbye. That part I've made my peace with, mostly. What I haven't made peace with is what came after. His lawyer called me 3 days after the funeral. His name was Mr. Decker, and he'd been handling my grandfather's legal affairs for almost 15 years. He asked if I could come to his office the following Monday. He said it quietly, the way people say things they know are going to change the shape of your life. I was 29 years old. I was working as a paralegal in Columbus, 40 minutes from the farm. I was not expecting what he told me. My grandfather had left everything to me. The farm, the operation, the equipment, the contracts, the farmhouse, and all the land. An estate valued by the county assessor at approximately $7.2 million, though the actual market value, as Mr. Decker explained carefully, was considerably higher once you accounted for the mineral rights and the grain storage infrastructure. He had one condition handwritten in a codicil attached to the will. I had to keep the farm operating. Not sell it, not subdivide it, not convert it to residential use. Keep it running as an agricultural operation for a minimum of 10 years, after which I could do whatever I chose. I sat in that office for a long time after Mr. Decker finished talking. I kept thinking about how my grandfather used to walk the perimeter of the backfield every morning before breakfast, even in winter, even in his 70s, even when his knees were bad. He never explained why, he just walked. My aunt found out 3 days later. Her name is Nadine. She is my grandfather's younger daughter, and she is 11 years older than me. And the two of us have always had a relationship that I would describe as civil, the way a ceasefire is civil, technically peaceful, but with a lot of weapons still loaded on both sides. She lives in Dayton with her husband, whose name is Keith, and Keith has opinions about money the way some people have opinions about religion. Loudly, constantly, and with the conviction that anyone who disagrees is either stupid or immoral. She called me the night after the will was filed for probate. I need you to understand something, she said. She didn't say hello. Grandpa wasn't in his right mind at the end. You know that, I know that. He was on medication, he was confused. That will is not an accurate reflection of his wishes. I let her finish. Then I said, he wrote the codicil in his own handwriting, Nadine. Mr. Decker has the original. It's a sick old man's handwriting, she said. That's all that is. I didn't argue. There's no point arguing with someone who has already decided what the truth is. What I didn't know in those first weeks was how organized she already was. She had spoken to a probate attorney before she'd called me. She had contacted my grandfather's 2 surviving siblings, great-uncle Roy in Cincinnati and great-aunt Phyllis in Akron, and told them that the will was being contested and that if the estate were redistributed fairly, they would all receive a share. She had, according to what I learned later, been building this coalition for approximately 72 hours before she dialed my number. I found out about the estate challenge when I received a formal legal notice in the mail. The grounds were undue influence, lack of testamentary capacity, and what the filing called suspicious circumstances surrounding the timing of the codicil. I read that phrase, suspicious circumstances, standing in my grandfather's kitchen. holding the letter over the farmhouse table where he used to do his bookkeeping, and I felt something harden in me that I don't think has fully softened since. I had moved into the farmhouse by then. It made practical sense. Someone needed to be on site. The farm manager my grandfather had employed for 8 years was still running the day-to-day operation and needed a point of contact, and my lease in Columbus had been month to month anyway. I packed what I needed, sublet my apartment to a friend, and drove out in 2 trips. Nadine did not like this. She called the farm manager, a man named Terry who had worked for my grandfather since I was in high school, and told him that the estate was in dispute and that he should not take direction from me until the legal matter was resolved. Terry called me the same afternoon, sounding uncomfortable in the way that people sound when they've been placed in a situation they didn't ask for. "She said I might be liable," he said, "for following instructions from someone who might not legally be the owner." I told him to keep doing his job exactly as he had been doing it. I told him I would handle my aunt. I did not at that moment know how I was going to handle my aunt, but I knew I was going to. The court date for the preliminary hearing on the estate challenge was set for 11 weeks out. In those 11 weeks, several things happened. My aunt drove to the farm twice without calling ahead. The first time, she walked through the farmhouse while I was in Columbus meeting with my own attorney. She had a key she'd had made years ago without my grandfather's knowledge, which I discovered when Terry told me he'd seen her car in the driveway. The second time, I was home. She arrived on a Thursday afternoon with Keith beside her and a yellow legal pad in her hand. She said she wanted to take an informal inventory of the personal property in the house. She said this in my grandfather's living room, standing next to the chair he'd sat in every evening for 30 years, and I watched Keith walk toward the bookshelf along the wall and pull out a leather-bound ledger my grandfather had used for handwritten farm records going back to 1987. "Put that back," I said. Keith looked at me the way men like Keith look at young women they've decided don't matter. "We're just documenting." "You're in my house," I said. "Put it back, and then both of you need to leave." Nadine started to say something about legal rights and shared family property, and how I was being unreasonable, and I let her get through most of it before I picked up my phone and called the county sheriff's non-emergency line. I didn't say anything dramatic about it. I just dialed and waited. They left before the dispatcher picked up. I changed the locks that evening, all of them. The legal challenge moved slowly the way these things do. My attorney, a woman named Ms. Farrow, who had the kind of quiet confidence that you want in someone who is about to fight on your behalf, told me that estate contests in Ohio rarely succeed when the will is properly executed, and the testator had a long-standing relationship with their attorney. She said the burden of proof on testamentary incapacity was high. She said I should document everything and be patient. I documented everything. I kept a running log with dates and times. I noted the 2 unannounced visits. I noted the call to Terry. I noted the conversations with great-uncle Roy, who reached out to me once to say, awkwardly, that he hoped we could resolve this without it getting ugly, which I took to mean that he'd been told the challenge was going well and was trying to signal that there might be a settlement offer coming. There was. Nadine's attorney sent a formal proposal. I would retain the farmhouse and 10 acres immediately surrounding it. The remaining 330 acres and the commercial operation would be divided among Nadine, Roy, and Phyllis, with Nadine receiving 60% as my grandfather's direct descendant. I forwarded it to Miss Farrow. She called me 20 minutes later. "This is a fishing expedition," she said. "They're hoping you'll panic and take something rather than risk losing everything in court." "I'm not panicking," I said. "Good. Then let's talk about what I found in." What Miss Farrow had found was this. 6 weeks before my grandfather's first heart attack, Nadine had approached a commercial real estate developer based in Dayton about a potential sale of the farm property. She had represented herself in writing in email correspondence that the developer had provided to Ms. Farrow voluntarily as someone who expected to have controlling interest in the estate within the year. 6 weeks before my grandfather's first heart attack. Farrow had also spoken to my grandfather's cardiologist, who confirmed that my grandfather had been cognitively sharp throughout his treatment, had asked detailed and appropriate questions at every appointment, and had shown no signs of confusion or diminished capacity. The doctor had, in fact, noted in the medical record that my grandfather was an unusually engaged and clear-thinking patient. We went to the preliminary hearing with both of these things ready. I want to tell you about the morning of that hearing, because I want you to understand what it felt like to sit in that courtroom. Nadine was on the other side of the aisle with Keith and Roy and Phyllis, and their attorney, and she was wearing a dark blue blazer and had her hair done and looked, for all the world, like a woman who was about to receive a correction of a great injustice. That's what she believed. I think she genuinely believed it. I sat with Miss Farrow and I kept my hands flat on the table and I breathed slowly. The judge reviewed the preliminary filings. He asked Nadine's attorney to speak to the grounds for the challenge. The attorney presented the argument about testamentary capacity, citing my grandfather's age, his medical condition, and the timing of the codicil. Then Miss Farrow stood up and presented the email correspondence. The courtroom didn't go silent in a dramatic way, it just shifted. I saw Nadine's attorney look at Nadine. I saw Nadine look at Keith. Keith was looking at the table. The email was dated March 14th, 6 weeks before my grandfather's first cardiac event on April 28th. In it, Nadine had written, "Timing is the only question right now. Once things move in our direction, we'll be in a position to discuss terms." The developer had replied asking for a timeline. Nadine had written back, "Not long now, he's not well, he's not well." She had written that about her own father to a real estate developer she was planning to sell his life's work to, before he had even had his first heart attack. The judge recessed for 20 minutes. When he came back, he denied the preliminary motion to contest the will. He said the evidence presented indicated that the challenge lacked sufficient grounds to proceed. He ordered Nadine's side to pay a portion of my legal costs. Nadine stood up when he finished. She said something, I couldn't hear what, exactly, and her attorney put a hand on her arm and she sat back down. I didn't look at her after that. Outside the courthouse, Miss Farrow shook my hand and said we'd follow up in writing. I thanked her. I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes without starting the engine. I called Terry from the parking lot. "The challenge has been dismissed," I said. "You can keep doing your job. Nothing's changing." He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Good. I liked working for your grandfather. I'd like to keep working for you." I drove back to the farm. It was late April by then, and the fields were starting to green, and the light in the late afternoon had that particular quality it gets in Ohio in spring, low and golden, and somehow both warm and a little melancholy at the same time. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a while looking at the farmhouse. My grandfather had put a porch on the south side of it in 1994. He'd built it himself over 2 summers, with help from a neighbor whose name I never knew. There's a photo of him standing on the finished porch that my mother kept on her dresser when I was growing up. He's squinting into the sun and he looks tired and proud and completely at ease with himself, the way people look when they've just finished something that required more of them than they expected. I thought about that photo for a long time. 3 weeks after the hearing, Nadine sent me a message through an intermediary. Not her attorney, not Keith, but Roy, who called me on a Sunday evening and said that Nadine wanted to know if there was any path to reconciliation. I thought about that word. Reconciliation. It's a big word for a small ask. I said, "Tell her the farm is not for discussion. If she wants a relationship with me, the farm is not part of that conversation. If she brings it up, the conversation is over." Roy said he'd pass that along. I don't know if he did. Nadine hasn't contacted me directly since. Here is what I want you to understand about what happened. I didn't win because I was clever. I didn't win because I outmaneuvered anyone. I won because my grandfather was clear-minded and thorough and deliberate, and because he put his wishes in writing in his own hand and filed them properly, and left a paper trail that told the truth, and because a real estate developer in Dayton decided that when a lawyer came asking for records, there was no good reason to protect the woman who'd tried to use him as part of a plan she hadn't told her own father about. The emails did what the emails did because they already existed. I didn't create them. I just had someone look for them. There are things I still think about. I think about the phone call I got from Roy the first time, the one where he said he hoped it wouldn't get ugly, and how I knew even then that ugly was already in the room, it just hadn't introduced itself yet. I think about Terry standing in the field in the late afternoon the summer after the hearing, explaining to me how the grain drying system works, and how I stood there genuinely trying to understand, because I had promised my grandfather I would keep this place going, and I intended to keep that promise. I think about Keith's face when Miss Farrow read that email into the record. I think about that phrase, "He's not well." Look, six words that told a judge everything he needed to know about what kind of person had filed a challenge to a dead man's final wishes. The porch on the south side of the house needs repainting. I've been meaning to get to it since last fall. I bought the paint in March and it's been sitting in the barn ever since, next to a shelf of my grandfather's old seed catalogs that I haven't been able to bring myself to throw away. I'll get to it this summer. There's no rush now, the fields are mine, the farmhouse is mine. The grain contracts and the processing barn and all 340 acres of central Ohio land that Howard Albright walked every morning before breakfast for 40 years. All of it is mine. Because he wanted it that way, and because the truth, when someone actually went looking for it, was right there waiting to be found. I walked the backfield this morning, before breakfast. In the early light before the heat came up. I think I'm starting to understand why he did it.